Yeah, there's the countdown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, let's see. All right, all right, all right. Hello, 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 everyone. This is Troublesome Terps live. Today is Monday, the 15th of November, 2021. And since the pandemic is still ongoing, we're still all in our respective locations, but we still joined together, everyone, on this platform tonight to bring Podcastival. That's the idea. So the idea is to celebrate the wonderful shows that we have out there that deal with interpreting, translation, localization, and all the other Asians that are out there. That sounded weird. Sorry about that. Let me hand it off straight to the first co-host for tonight, Sarah Hickey. Sarah, how are you?
Hey, yeah, I'm actually super sick, but I was saying in the intro to the guests as well that I had FOMO, and so I decided to be here anyway. I couldn't miss this because when you ever get all these language podcast celebrities in one room, so I just had to be here. So yeah, happy to see everyone. I'm really, really impressed that everyone showed up. So yeah, I guess, sorry, I'm totally messing up the intro, but handing over to Alexander Gansmeyer.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be back on a live show. We haven't done one in quite a while. And just in case you're wondering, from a couple of episodes back, this is the Avengers Endgame of podcasts that we promised you. This is basically all the biggest players coming together to put on something special. So this is super exciting. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
It's probably going to break the... Figure it out. Also, it's the first time we're doing a live stream from this platform right now. So fingers crossed, everyone, that everything works fine. To get us started, we have prepared well, actually, we have several messages, several voice memos from those podcasters who weren't able to join us tonight. And we will be starting with a message from Lauren and Gretchen from the Linguistics podcast. So let me just get that ready for you all, and let's listen to them. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Gretchen McCulloch.
And I'm Lauren Gorn, and we are the co-hosts of Linguistics, a podcast that is enthusiastic about linguistics.
It's not just translation between languages that can be an interesting linguistic challenge, and sometimes translating between varieties of English can also show some quirky differences.
I'm an Australian, and Gretchen, you are a Canadian, and we have had to navigate some of the differences between our varieties of English over the years, and thought we'd play one of our favourite games, which is guess what this regional English word means. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. My Australian word for you is the word doona.
Doona. Okay. This sounds maybe like a dessert. It sounds very smooth and fluffy.
You've got the fluffy bit right. It is I think the British word is duvet.
Oh yeah, we have duvets in Canada as well.
So a big kind of quilted, possibly downy, or at least very fluffy, as you intuited, blanket for sleeping.
All right. And my Canadian word for you to guess is keener.
I am a non-rhotic Australian accented person, so doona and keener sound more similar for me than they do for you.
They totally do. Any guesses what this means?
Does it have anything to do with the word keen?
It does.
Someone who is more keen than other people?
That is true. It often shows up specifically in more of an academic context. So a student who's coming to office hours or something, you'd be like, oh, that's so-and-so. They're one of my keeners. And I think one of the missing pieces in the Canadian English context for why keener is a term is that other varieties of English have words like teacher's pet or brown noser or something like that that can refer to a, academically interested student. But a keener isn't necessarily a pejorative. Like teachers and professors will say this of their students of like, oh yeah, that's one of my keeners. They're enthusiastic about something. And you can sort of apply it in another context as well. If you're showing up early for your, exercise class or something, you might be a keener in that context as well.
That's lovely. I feel like we need more positive terms for enthusiastic engagement.
I think so too. And I also think that we could definitely have a children's cartoon with the characters Doona and Keena.
Oh my gosh, that would be so cute. We did a whole episode on being speakers of varieties of English other than British and American English on the show, and we had a lot of fun with similar regionalisms and navigating life as people who speak different varieties of English.
And of course, we do get enthusiastic about other linguistics topics on Lingthusiasm as well. If you just want a chance to listen to a Canadian and Australian and practice what sort of subtle regional varieties you might want to get exposed to.
And I'm sure there are lots of localisms you have in your own varieties of English that you can test each other on as well.
All the best to the Troublesome Terps for the rest of the live show.
And we're sorry we can't be there from our other corners of the world.
Awesome.
That was
Pretty
lovely.
cool.
Yeah, that was really lovely. So huge thanks to Lauren and Gretchen, and thanks for joining us in the form of this lovely voice memo. And with that, well, actually, was I the only one who was thinking about whether the word brown noser was actually not safe for work? I'm not sure. Anyway, with that, we'll be moving on straight to our first panel. So we'd like to
Don't think
welcome.
about where it comes from.
Okay, good.
Don't think about where it comes from.
All right. The voice you heard there is he'll be joining us for the first panel. Hello, Michael. And also joining us for the first panel are Florian Faas from Slater and Tucker Johnson from Nimsy. And Tucker told me, never met Florian before. Is this the first time you're actually...
Florian? I don't think so.
That is a premiere. It's the first time.
Okay, good.
Well, this is
Wow.
what
I
interpreters
would
do, right?
hate if
Connect
this was
bridges.
like live streamed of me,
Guys,
like Florian,
I
like,
think you
yeah,
guys-
we've met 6 times.
I think we have a lot to talk about. From the conversations I've had with you both, I'm glad I can be a part of this to sort of mediate.
You've always been the matchmaker, Stephen.
Okay, that's
Mediate.
awesome.
This should be interesting.
Exactly. So should we just hand it over to you, Michael? No, I'll at least... idea was. And the funny thing is, or the interesting thing is, we had 2 of you on before. So Florian, we had on to discuss sort of business intelligence and researching the language industry. So you can go back to that episode and listen to that if you have missed it. And we've had Michael on before as well, but in the context of a different podcast. So maybe we'll start with you, Michael. Tell us a little bit about your, latest, recent, current podcast project, the Global Podcast.
Yeah, latest and greatest. So
Exactly.
it was a distinct pivot for us. The first podcast that I started was corporately sponsored. It had a team of people who supported the wild work that me and my co-host Renato Benenato did. And it was thoroughly reviewed and scrubbed and checked to make sure that all things were appropriate for corporate communication. The second one we launched when I left that company, and it's just our work. It's 2 people. I liken it to the type of conversations you would have going to a localization conference, and after you're in the bar pretty late at night and you're talking to experts the way they really talk about the work they do. This was really what we wanted to push, because I find that they're very not just capable, but people who are doing remarkable work, and many times at a podium or even around people they don't trust, they may not come as clean with how remarkable the work they're doing is. And so to be able to get to that level, just to, for me, mostly satisfy my curiosity, to hear what are really the greatest and latest things going on in our industry that may not get to be talked about publicly.
That's great, and a great reason, I think, is to satisfy one's own curiosity.
For sure. That's
probably-
probably you never run out of topics, right?
Exactly. The reason for you, Tucker, I just said before we started, jokingly, that you're live 24/7 these days.
Yeah.
So, what were the sort of last conversations that you had on Nimsy Live? What was the really cool stuff you did recently?
We have all sorts of different conversations on Nimsy Live, and that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to start it. Actually, you know what? I never really wanted to start it. I'm really an unwilling podcast host in many respects. But one of the things that I've grown to love about it is just giving a platform to all sorts of different things. So just recently we had John Fennelly, the CEO of Lionbridge, coming on and talking about all the cool stuff they're doing over there. We're not corporate sponsored, so I don't have to suck up to anybody, but neither do we have any like gotcha moments on there. Salvo from Airbnb came on to announce the big stuff that's going on over at Airbnb in regards to machine learning and machine translation and the scale that they're rolling it out there. And just on Friday, I'm down here in California right now, visiting my folks, visiting the family, dialing in from my brother's house. And just before I left, just before I got on a plane, I was with a bunch of folks over at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies playing a card game live.
Yeah.
They had come up with this
That's
cool
right.
card
Yeah.
game to teach about vendor management. So all sorts of different stuff.
How cool is that?
Yeah, that sounds
It's pretty
super
cool.
geeky. Has any of you seen that card game? I missed the broadcast, so I'll have to rewatch. That sounds
Plug
like
for
a
fruit
very
vendor. It's
Yeah, the fruit vendor thing.
it's a pretty cool thing. I
It's cool.
recommend it for companies that want to like train their vendor managers and have interesting conversations.
that's
So Florian,
awesome.
you clearly have seen it, and who you just heard again was Florian Fest from Slater Pod. So Florian, you've seen this as well?
Yeah. I think we put in our newsletter, and somebody super enthusiastically wrote back that they love it, and they started using it with their with the company, but also some people they're training. So didn't play myself, but we don't have vendor managers, so it's quite cool.
Yeah, I mean, you can't all be doing the same stuff. So, well, yeah. But yeah, Slater Pod. People a little bit about what you've been up to over at Slater.
Well, you guys
And
are
I think you're busy
responsible, right?
with SlaterCon Remote as well.
Yeah. In front of the bonsai, that's my life now. So you
Yeah.
guys are responsible for me starting Slaterpod. I listened to Troublesome Terps, and I'm like, oh man, it's like so regular and it's so good, and I really need to get this started. So unfortunately,
Oh,
I
stop!
committed
You're
to-
already invited.
Casper then.
and I committed to a weekly schedule, which in hindsight turned out to be
Insane.
kind of ambitious,
lot.
but so far we've managed. And then after 40, 50 episodes, we started bringing on guests because it got a little kind of too, I don't know, how many times can you just chat with each other? So I'm doing this with Esther Bond, our research director in London, right? So
Shout out to
so we
Esther.
still do our kind of industry chit chat before 15, 20 minutes, and then we bring on a guest. And we've also had great guests. It's such a fascinating industry, so you never run out of interesting guests. So it's for example, a good example is we had Kenneth Heafield from the University of Edinburgh, and we we invited him because we got into a Twitter fight. A
Like an
couple,
actual
That-
fight.
that- Hands
no,
down,
well,
best
it was.
guest.
He called us out for an article and basically said we got everything wrong. And then I'm like, no, we didn't get everything wrong. And then and so it was
Wow.
back and forth. I'm like, hey, why don't you come to the podcast and tell us what we got wrong? And he accepted the challenge. And a couple of weeks later, he was on the pod. So that's why I
pretty
love
cool.
doing this. Yeah.
That's how things get done these days. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yep.
So, Michael, we're approaching the end of the year almost, slowly, quickly. I don't know. And the Troublesome Terps are definitely going a year in review episode
Year in
again.
review.
But from your point of view, what were sort of the big highlights, the big developments, I guess, in 2021? Anything that stood
Yeah.
out to you?
I would say two things, and one we're probably going to talk about is whether we're going to cover it from the perspective of recovery or great resignation or whatever you want to define this last year as. That will be something that will be explored pretty thoroughly. One of the things that I appreciate about what you guys are doing and our industry as a whole is doing is the ability to really be known. And this movement that we're having is giving a lot of people platforms and voices for the work they're doing. And in a world where deep fakes become more and more relevant, where there's a lot of information, there was a lot of time for people to sort of sit around during 2020 and think about what would resonate with people, and whether they can actually do it or not is sort of secondary. Florian, I saw that there was the interview, and it was about the fake LinkedIn profiles, right, that are out there in interpretation and that piece, and there's always been in recruiting. I think that's going to become more and more valid as sort of community, or more and more relevant is community validation, and making sure that some of the things that companies are committing to and being able to do are actually proven in the work that they do. And so that's something that is my curiosity right now, because If you look at a lot of the themes, especially for localization companies, they're all kind of the same. They're all saying kind of the same things. And then it's like, well, who is actually doing this work?
I see Tucker was moving, so disagree, agree? What's your
Sit
take?
still,
No,
Tucker,
I mean,
or you get
I mean,
called
It
on.
looked like you were getting
preach
ready
it, brother
to say
Michael.
no.
Preach it. No,
Okay.
no, I don't disagree. I think like to me the watchword moving forward is authenticity. You know, when I was shaking my head when Michael was talking about deep fakes and all of that stuff, and people are expecting a different engagement from the brands that they consume and the services that they offer these days, and that's reflected in everything. It's reflected in how they relate to people, and this overproduced, highly, like 5 years ago, video marketing was all in, overproduced stuff, but nowadays people want to see authenticity. People want to see brand leaders be humans, to a certain extent. And I think podcasting is a great format for that. And I like to do the live. I've just doubled down on the live streaming. And like I said, I was an unwilling entry into this field, but started doing it, and people were digging it. And I think a big part of it is because you can't fake it when you're live on air. You can't go back and fix your voice and Photoshop your pimples out and all of that stuff. Is like what you see is what you get, and I think there's a strong appetite for that. And my mantra as I go into 2022 is still the same. It's to kill the webinar. I hate webinars. Webinars are
too.
not audience focused. They
I'm
are
cheering you
marketing
on.
manager
Preach,
focused.
Tucker.
Yeah, no, I mean, how many, oh God, every time I see a webinar and I'm like, I'm going to go sign up for this. And within 15 seconds, I'm so frustrated that I'm like, screw this, they're not getting my business. People want to just be able to log in, see something. Information wants to be free, right? No one wants to give their contact information to watch an over-rehearsed slideshow presentation, PowerPoint presentation. There needs to be some entertainment value. There needs to be some intimacy. There needs to be some audience engagement, not just a Q&A session at the end, but throughout, right? And I am hopefully trying to, I'm encouraging everybody I can to get into live streaming, because why would people go to a webinar when they can just log into LinkedIn and see who's streaming today? It's kind
Yeah,
of,
that's
I,
a good point.
I took that in a different direction, but hey, you get a bunch of
Run with it.
podcasters in a room together and you expect to have,
On a live show?
I
Yeah, I'm
know,
not sure
right?
about the webinars, but okay, that's a different discussion maybe.
But
Michael,
the,
yeah.
the commitment in that is tough too, because if you're looking at like a half hour or an hour of my time, like I need the 15 second, 30-second hook that makes me go, okay, this might get there. Or some sound bites. So I mean the level, like stylistically, we all vary even on this call, and like how overproduced or underproduced shows are.
Yeah.
But it's the content that's being put out. It's the story that's being told. It's the data that's being expressed to our people that we really need to focus on, because the slick stuff in the time are just a waste. Yeah. So, and Florian, I'm kind of setting you up, man. Bring the data.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No
content
data
is
for
queen.
that.
Let's hear it.
Go do. No, there's others that are doing the podcast data, right? No, what I like about podcasting is, I mean, the video to us was and still is a little bit kind of an afterthought, despite the bonsai, and so I like listen. I mean, I'm a kind of a podcast edit myself. Like I use it for, I mean, when I go running, when I do other stuff, like literally almost every second of my life that's in non-dialogue, I basically have the AirPods in. So in terms of the overproduction, I totally hear you. What I do like is good audio, right? That needs to get sorted out. You need to get a good mic, and I think I'm like 90% there, but I want to get 100% there, but it's almost, I don't know. I need to better setting and like the walls and, some of that. So, I don't know. Industry, to me, this year was super cool in terms of all that frontier language tech. I mean, Michael mentioned the deep fake stuff before, and we had Yeah, we had a company on the podcast called Synthesia, and they're basically they don't do deep fakes, but they allow you to do like avatars that speak different languages. I mean, that just continues to blow my mind.
Yeah.
And I use it in every single industry presentation I give, and I think people who listen to a couple of them are starting to get bored of it. But it's so groundbreaking. I love it. So
Yeah, I saw a demo of that as well this year unfortunately on a webinar, but that was truly mind blowing. Like,
yeah.
yeah, that was actually pretty impressive.
You can do it in like 5 minutes. I could do one now and show you, right? So
And I can confirm, Florian.
it could join the podcast.
Yeah.
You've actually used it before, Florian.
I got a subscription. It's like $50 a month or $40 a month.
That is
Super
too
cheap.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. With that kind of stuff. Yeah. What about SlaterCon? That has moved online quite a while ago already, but how did that change the game for you?
It's convenient. It's so convenient. I'm
Everything,
getting
right? Yeah.
years of life back. Yeah, no, I love it. Look, it's okay. I've traveled enough in my life. I mean, I feel for anybody who hasn't. But for me, this was great. I mean, we do have. I mean, there's some. We're using Hopin, so there's some networking component to it. People like that too. And so far, so good. You know, let's see. I think there's others that blazing the trail in terms of in-person conferencing. I like that, and it's I think it's webinar plus. You know, so there is some engagement in there.
Michael, any thoughts about that? About how the conference space is changing, or industry conferences are changing?
Yeah, I have not. Like I said, a lot of my value is in the interpersonal piece and the quiet conversations that take time. You guys probably are familiar with Tim Ferriss and his interview style and how he does these like 3-hour plus interviews of people, and it gets them past the first sort of normal 20 minutes of talking points that get into really deep content that you may not have heard from someone who you hear from all the time. So put that into the event space. The online part of being, it's the criticism of webinars. The online part and being talked at really doesn't sort of feed my soul the way that getting eye to eye with people tends to. Maybe I need to set up like 3-hour phone calls with people. I think I would drive them insane. Tucker.
Yeah.
Tucker, what should we have a 3-hour phone call, Tucker?
I want to listen in on that.
My battery just died, so I had to go switch machines really quickly. Welcome to live streaming, everybody.
Yeah.
You got to be shameless.
I can quickly and very smoothly.
That was pretty smoothly.
Congrats. Yeah. I barely noticed. Yeah. Any words from you, Tucker, on the sort of changing? I mean, we webinars, but the change in online and meetings and stuff like that. Anything from your perspective at NIMSY?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a very strong appetite for getting together as a people, or as an industry. Our industry is an industry of people. And if you think about it, our industry attracts the type of people that have a passion for building communities, building cross-cultural communities and connections, and facilitating conversations. Of course, we are a gregarious bunch, and people, I think, are chomping at the bit to get back to in-person, because that's where the magic happens. That's where the innovation happens. That's where the really stupid sounding but potentially awesome ideas are formed late night at the bars. And I think the online events have served their purpose, and they've helped scratch that itch during the pandemic when getting together as a group was not possible. But it's far from replace the in-person events. What it's done actually is provided increased competition to the in-person event space, and I think increased competition leads to innovation. So the traditional events are now going to have to be having a hybrid option in order to capture both sides of the market. And from an accessibility and inclusion standpoint, it's been a great thing because people that would never dream of having a budget to be able to go to a Loke-World or a SlaterCon or all of these other great conferences that we have in our industry, now all of a sudden they have this option where they can dial in remotely and perhaps not get the full experience, but nonetheless feel included.
So you're kind of veering into the topic of accessibility. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit as well, and just any thoughts on that topic, accessibility? Maybe also from a point of view of automatic speech recognition, automatic captioning. Anything interesting you've been seeing recently there? Question to
Was
all
that
of you. I don't know who wants to jump in first. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I think everyone's kind of like recognizing the lack of accessibility we have on our podcasts and kind of not wanting to talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would, it's something that I've thought a lot about because there's a visual component to us, ours, and the audio component. We do use auto-generated captions, and I recognize that, frankly, that's not good enough. We could do better on that. It's difficult with live. I would love to, and I've had it lined up a few times, but just always ends up not falling through at the last minute. I'd love to have ASL interpretation on video podcasts, and that's just me, right? But I think it opens up a whole new world because I think the signing community out there is a community that, frankly, well, I don't know, Troublesome Terps, you guys probably don't, but the larger localization, the Loke-World crowd, the usual suspects, we kind of overlook that. And I think it comes out of a place of ignorance, honest ignorance that's honestly come by, right? Just because we're not open to that space. But I'd like to see a lot more accessibility for that out there. From myself too. I'm not like blaming anybody else. I'm just thinking I could be forking over the bucks to do all that stuff too, because I have gotten the feedback that the auto-generated captions,
It's
it
hard.
does the trick
We
a little
we
bit.
tried it
Florian?
with we tried it with AI Media, the Australian company. They offered us one for one SlaterCon, but it went through a re-speaker, and this was the first time I heard about re-speaking. So this is for captioning. It's something that they actually do. So there's somebody who sits and actually re-speaks what we're saying, and because the system is trained on that person's voice, it works a lot better. So that was the first time I heard about re-speaking, and it was good. It was good.
Yeah,
But
that's what
I mean,
And they also
German
correct
TV at least. Yeah.
the captions
It-
live.
yeah, they correct the captions, and I mean, there's probably all the ums and ahs and all that, right, is taken out, but you got the human in the loop again.
So I think it's good that we feel sort of guilty for not addressing this more for us personally. But you look at what the big companies have done during this time, like Microsoft, and the level of accessibility they have offered, and it's extraordinary. It's been wonderful to witness that every single conference that Microsoft has had this year has had sign language through hybrid. It's had more languages offered than they ever have in their history, and those big platforms have been able to really execute on them. There's a company I'm close to here in Seattle that has facilitated that for them. The barrier of entry, I mean, we have a sound engineer who works on my current podcast. It's a lot for a couple guys who like to chat with people to put together on the back end. So, but I'm thrilled to see the amount of work that's being done in this space.
Great. Well, thanks, Michael, for acknowledging all the work that could go into a properly
And I
produced
think it will get to us. I
podcast.
think it's going to be the sort of thing where it's just a level of understanding that is delivered that years past we could have never imagined, that we can really understand each other and have understanding for others.
Great, awesome. So I guess to wrap this panel up, can I ask you to look into either to look into the crystal ball, or maybe tell us a little bit about what you'd like to see next year or in the near future, what you're excited to to see, what should be coming. So anything that you'd like to see, anything you can share with us in that space?
I'd like
Whoever wants to
to.
go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'll volunteer. I'd like to see less of me out there. Like you guys are joking around. Oh, Tucker's live streaming 24/7. I'm like, no, it's like 23/7. Like, don't get too dramatic. But I'd like to see less of me out there because I'd like to see more people out there live streaming. I see my role here, and perhaps I'm a little bit grandiose in my self-image, but I kind of see my role as paving a way for other people to go out there and experiment and do fun things, go live, make an idiot out of yourself on air, do stupid stuff in public. And learn from it while you're doing it. And the reason I think that I can do that is because I work for myself, right? Like I don't have a boss. I couldn't do that back when I was working at my previous company, right? I'd get pulled into rooms. I did get pulled into rooms back when I was at my previous company. But nowadays I can go out there, I can invoke my inner honey badger and just tear shit up in the hopes that people are going to see that and be inspired to go tear shit up themselves.
Well, you did already pass it on to me, the whole
Yeah,
not being
I've
afraid
already
to
roped
fail.
Hickey into it.
Fail in
She's doing a great
public.
job. Quick plug for Last Week in Localization with Sarah Hickey.
Yeah,
Every
it
Monday
was
on MZ
regular
Live.
every Monday until recently when I got a bit sick.
It is regular. They don't need to know that.
Yeah, no, it's every Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Except when we're not. I was listening to Florian, and you committed to a schedule. That's your first mistake, right? That's your first mistake. Don't commit to a schedule. Don't. I mean, just.
Yeah, once you hop on the bandwagon, that's it.
I did
I know.
to myself though. I don't know, but like you got all these kind of superstar podcasters that are at like episode 2,345, right? So like we're coming up to 100. So I guess my goal for 2022 is let's get to 150. So just sticking to the schedule is nice. I love it. I love talking to people. I mean, I'm sure Tucker, that's what you appreciate about this as well, right? I mean, you get to talk to so many incredibly interesting people. Plus, you got to be really switched on yourself. Like you can't. I mean, at least I have to. I can't like if I like lose focus, it gets embarrassing quite quickly. So, and we don't edit anything, so it's kind of it has the feel, I guess, of a live stream. We've only edited once in like 100 episodes. So my goal, let's get to 152 episodes by the end of 2022.
Cool. Fingers crossed. Michael?
Maybe check out live
fabulous.
streaming, Tucker. I'm inspired now.
The streaming.
Yeah.
I look forward to getting to the in-person interviews again. That part that is really where I like to mix it up and where I feel personally the most energy in what we're doing, and I think the most interesting content. We've had some interesting shows that aren't in person, but there's just I get more out of it, frankly, and it's about us, right?
Yeah.
On some level.
It's about me, Michael.
It's about me.
It's all about me.
Yeah.
Tucker.
So well done for acknowledging the vanity aspect of podcasting. That's cool, though. Great, awesome.
Oh, I'm aware.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks for this first panel. And with that, we'll move on to our next voice memo. And we've talked about this a little bit already because one of you, I forget who was brought up, and we got
ASL,
Yeah, ASL, exactly. So we got a lovely voice message from Romy and Kira over on the Lean podcast. So let's take a look at that. And after that voice memo, we'll talk to Ada, Carrie, and Megan in our next panel. So let's listen to Romy and Kira.
The Lean podcast.
Hello.
Hi. My name's Kira.
And my name is Romy. And this is, what is it?
This is
The Lean podcast.
First, we want to say a big thank you to the Troublesome Terps for having us here today and asking us to be involved. It's very exciting to be here.
Absolutely. It's such a cool opportunity to show our work off to so many different people. We're really, really grateful. Thank you so much. And maybe as you're watching, you've noticed there's something a little bit different about our podcast. I don't know, Kira, do you want to say a bit more?
That's right, Robbie. Well, you might notice that we're using sign language, more specifically Irish Sign Language, ISL, because we are both Irish Sign Language interpreters. Now, Irish Sign Language is the recognised Indigenous language of the deaf community here in Ireland. And it's got its own grammar, it's got its own structure. It's not based on spoken language, it's very much its own language. I don't know, maybe you know a little bit about sign languages or not, but every country has its own national sign language.
Not only that, some countries even have 2 sign languages. As an example, in Spain, they have 2 sign languages. They've got Spanish Sign Language and Catalonian Sign Language as well. So there you are, little fact. And not only that, it is worth mentioning that Irish Sign Language as its own language is different from British Sign Language, also known as BSL, and it's also different from American Sign Language, ASL. You know, even though they all speak the same spoken language of English, they all have their own sign languages. So yeah, little fun fact for you there.
So maybe you've guessed by this point what our podcast is all about, but if you haven't, we talk all things sign language interpreting.
Absolutely.
Everything to do with sign language interpreting. Anything you can imagine, really, we talk about.
That's it, exactly. So normally Kira and I, we pick a question for an episode. So as an example, we'd say what we think team interpreting is, just as an example. Normally what would happen is Kira and I would then talk about this topic for the first part and go, okay, well, what does this actually mean for us? You know, how we team interpret, how we work together. We go on our practical knowledge and our academic knowledge, we chat about it. And then we invite someone way more knowledgeable and influenceable than we are. And we have a conversation, the 3 of us, about the topic. And at the end of the day, it's just a chat about various topics related to interpreting. Right, Kira?
That's exactly it. And you might be thinking, why did you set up your podcast? How did it all begin? Well, basically, if you don't know already, myself and Romy are 2 massive nerds, self-confessed nerds. We love talking all about interpreting, linguistics, language, learning as much as we can. And we've been like that for quite some time because the 2 of us actually studied together and became interpreters. Yeah. So we've always been having these conversations and these discussions. And what we normally do back in the day is we'd use WhatsApp, and still do use WhatsApp voice notes to send messages to each other. And this was a constant daily occurrence. So one day I thought, why are we just the 2 of us having these conversations? I'm sure there's loads of interpreters out there that are having the exact same issues, same challenges, same dilemmas coming up for them. So I think we definitely need to share that conversation with others. And that's how we began the Liam podcast.
Absolutely. We kind of were going back and forth a little bit about what languages we wanted to record the podcast in, particularly because we felt it's not just hearing interpreters who work in sign language. We have deaf interpreters. And deaf interpreters are those who are first language Irish Sign Language users who are part of the deaf community and know the various language requirements that would be needed for the community. And it's a very valued and necessary skill. We felt if we only used English for the podcast, we would be excluding parts of our professional body, which wouldn't be okay. And we didn't want that at all, which is why we decided to make our podcast as accessible as possible. So that means our podcasts are always in English, Irish Sign Language, and we have English captioning as well. This is to kind of try cater to as many audiences as possible to listen and watch our podcast. Did you want to add anything else about that, Keeks?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned deaf interpreting, Romy, because that's actually one of the topics we decided to talk about in one of our episodes of our podcast.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, if you want to have a look, have a watch, have a listen, so you can find out more information about it there.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, we're a fun, open podcast, and all we want to do is talk about all things interpreting, right, Keeks?
That's it, really. That's exactly it. It's a very simple idea.
And that's why we're so grateful to the Troublesome Terps to have invited us here today. That's a really cool opportunity to show a little bit about who we are, and maybe you learned a little bit about sign language, and maybe you'll have a new perspective about interpreting in general. That's the aim.
That's right. So if you'd like to see more or learn a little bit more about us, you can watch our podcast in Irish Sign Language on our YouTube channel, or you can listen along to our English version wherever you like to listen to your favourite podcasts. You can find us there. So just to say thanks so much again for watching. Thanks so much for inviting us. We hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.
It's the Lean Podcast.
I mean, I know we're usually announcing segues, but the whole discussion about inclusion and accessibility that we just heard on the previous panel could not have come at a better point right before this video. So that was excellent. That was an excellent transition. And thank you so much for the Lean Podcast.
That was incredible.
But so that brings us actually to our second panel, on where we have two podcasts on. One is Se Se Escucha with Ada Folkmer, and The Vocal Fries, which is Carrie Gillen and Megan Figueroa. So welcome to the three of you. I think we're all everybody's online. Welcome to all three of you. Do you maybe want to talk about the names of your podcast? Because I think that might be the first thing that a lot of people are wondering about. What is Se Escucha? What does that mean? And also, what's a vocal fries? What is a vocal fry? Ada, do you want to go first, maybe?
Sure, I'll go first. So Se Escucha means seen and heard. We are a podcast about language justice, about interpreting, and about organizing in the U.S. South. So for me, I wanted the title to kind of convey that language justice is work that you hear, that you, mostly we talk about interpreting, English, Spanish interpreting, but it's also something that you should feel. And so that's why we wanted to say Se ve, se escucha. So. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, and it's true. There's definitely all these components in there. So Carrie and Megan, how did you guys come up with your name for your podcast?
Well, we were talking about what the podcast was going to be about from the very beginning. It was always going to be about linguistic discrimination and why that's bad. And at the time, vocal fry was talked about a lot. So that's a way of using your voice that's a little bit creaky. And a lot of people think it's only young women who use it, but it's basically all English speakers use it at least somewhat. And it's not even young women who use it the most. There are some men who use it the most. But anyway, so we were just like banding ideas back and forth, like what would be a good name that incorporates vocal fry. And I can't remember who came up with it. I think it might have been me, but I can't remember for sure. I was like, vocal fries. So then I asked my husband to create a little fry icon for us because he's a graphic designer. So
and it's iconic. Point, at least to me, in my eyes. And also, it's perfect because one of the things that women get disparaged for as podcast hosts is vocal fry. So it works on that level too.
That is very true. But I think already from the introduction of the two podcasts, maybe you can kind of derive why we lumped you two podcasts together, with the whole angle of sort of linguistic discrimination, justice in language, justice in interpreting. We figured that this would be a very potentially socially conscious panel discussion. And kind of the first question that I want to ask the three of you is, why did you think that a podcast was the right format for you to talk about these potentially relatively heavy topics? At times, I mean, justice and organizing, but also linguistic discrimination can be pretty heavy-handed, or pretty heavy topics, I should say. And if not handled correctly, can be pretty heavy-handed. So why did you guys figure a podcast would be the right way to go? Whoever wants to jump on it first.
I guess for me, I thought, because Megan and I have been friends for so long, at least we could keep it lighter. If it was a podcast, like you can have a conversation and you can make jokes. It's easier to, I think, tonally hit the right note. In text, it can be harder, I think. Although we're writing a book about it too right now, so now I really know how much harder it is to do.
We need to as well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so I just, I think for me, it's like, you could do it in video for sure. But there's it's easier to just do audio, like in terms of being an amateur, it's a little bit harder, I think, to also do video, at least for me. So I think that's why I listen to a lot of podcasts. I like getting my information auditorially. So for me, that was just like, it made sense to do a podcast.
And podcasts were in their heyday. I mean, like 2016, 17, when we were thinking about it, or 2017, I guess. Not that they're not in their heyday now. I don't even know what we consider their heyday now, but podcasts are very popular, and they were when we were talking about it. So,
the golden age of podcasting. Ada, what about you?
For me, so I'm a freelance English-Spanish interpreter, but I also train interpreters. And we had written a manual, like a training manual for social justice interpreters. And so as soon as we printed that manual, and that manual was based on several years of community interpreter practice sessions. So we published this manual. It's beautiful. It has these nice illustrations. And as soon as we published the manual, it was kind of outdated. And I wouldn't have said that anymore. And I wouldn't explain it that way anymore. And me and my co-host who started the podcast, we were podcast nerds, like Florian said, like always with the earbuds on. And so we thought that the podcast would be a way to continue the conversation from the interpreter training curriculum. So we thought of it kind of as an extension of it. And it was a good way to kind of like, as things adapt, as things change, we can put it into the podcast instead of going back to the manual and like editing version 3.5, version 4.2, version. So that's where it came from.
Can I ask a really simple question? The idea of language justice and linguistics. Could all three of you give me a really potted definition of what you mean by that?
This is my least favorite question, and I was like, they're going to ask me what it is. This is my least favorite question, but for me, language justice has to do with the right of being able to speak and to be understood. And it has to do with the right to participate fully, no matter what language you speak, or no matter how you speak that language. So interpretation and translation are a part of that. But I think it's, for me, how do we use language as part of our movements for climate justice, gender justice, racial justice? How are we thinking about language in our movements for social justice?
Yeah, similarly, for me, it would be linguistic or language justice would be when we stop, we get rid of the barriers to material and immaterial resources and opportunities based on how someone speaks or signs.
And for me, it's just being able to speak the language that's part of your heritage, right? So for me, I get to speak that every day. Right. As I told Megan one time, I have no idea how many generations ago my ancestors wouldn't have spoken English. Maybe Scots at some point, but it was a while ago. But for many people, especially Indigenous people, their access to their language has been taken away by us colonizers on purpose. It was. The languages have been purposely suppressed. And so for me, language justice involves just even being able to speak your own language, being given the opportunity to learn it in whatever way it works for you.
And another kind of difficult question coming from the research now, are translation and always helping language justice, or do they sometimes hold it back?
I've been thinking about this a lot, speaking with deaf colleagues and just about podcasts in general too, that there's no real way for their message to be heard or seen through them. It's going to be through the interpreter, no matter how you really look at it. So that, I think, is just I don't know if there's a way to solve that problem, but that is an issue that I've heard from deaf colleagues.
No, I think that there's a bunch of bad translation and bad interpretation that is hindering access to justice. And one of the things that we sometimes talk about, kind of when we introduce language justice to clients or to folks who are trying to incorporate it into their work, is there's access and there's justice. And I think about the hospital here where I live in North Carolina. Right now, if you give birth in the hospital, you have access to an interpreter via a language line. And for me, that's not justice, right? So to think about those two things, I think sometimes helps as well.
So, Megan and Carrie, you mentioned that you're writing a book. So is that sort of something that you're touching upon in the book as well?
Yes, that is part of what we're talking about. I mean, we have this like big idea of like, okay, linguistic discrimination. People don't really know what it is, and people engage in it all the time. So how do we explain what it is, and to stop doing it, and like how to stop doing it? And yeah, one of the topics is has to do with ableism, autism. But we talk about so many different things because it's everywhere. You know, it involves class, race, sex, gender, like anything you can possibly think of, basically. There is a way that we can discriminate based on language. And so it is kind of a huge thing.
Yeah, and it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be emotionally, too. I research things or write things, and I feel emotionally just drained because it's hurtful things that we're talking about, things that hurt people. So it's harder than I thought. Writing a book is hard. Writing a book that is so painful, like some of these topics are so painful, and then trying to be like, how do we make this digestible so that like the podcast. So it's a lot of things are making it difficult.
Yeah, for me, I think the hardest thing is like hitting the right note of like, this is a really serious topic, but also like, I don't want you to be depressed. I want you to be like enjoying the read, and it's actually quite difficult. So.
Yeah, I would imagine striking the right balance there, getting the right tone. That can't be easy. But so we're slowly having to move on to the next video message and then the next panel. But I did want to ask you guys sort of this is probably a question that we could discuss also for like an hour, as we could with anything, with anyone here. But I think especially in the United States, the whole notion of social justice, you know, the social justice warriors and SJWs and stuff has gotten a really bad rap. And I feel like what you guys are doing and what you guys are talking about is incredibly important. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you think that we can do to kind of help destigmatize social justice and kind of take that stink away from it again? Because I mean, we should all want social justice, right? Linguistic justice, social justice. I don't know. That just occurred to me. It might be a totally off base question.
No, I think it's a good question. So I mean, here's the thing. I don't think it's actually bad or wrong to be a social justice warrior. So to me, it's being called, and we're called SJWs all the time.
And Marxist Karens.
And Marxist Karens by our fan. So I just think it's fine. I don't. If that's what you want to call me, that's fine. If you think that that's a bad term, that says more about you than it does about us. And that's, to me, like, just saying stuff like that actually can be helpful. Like, oh, what's wrong with being a social justice warrior?
Yeah.
Explain to me.
Yeah. Yeah, push them on it. And I think that you'll see they can't really take it much further.
Because they don't even know what Marxism is.
I know.
Marxist Karens.
Yeah, and they don't even understand what a Karen is. I'm like, what?
I'm beginning to think, doesn't think that you're a danger, you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah.
That also.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Karen thing reminds me of one thing which sort of leads us into the next video. Because it's from one of the podcasts. This is called Corinne, and the speech recognition engine sort of kept rendering it as Karen for some reason. But I was glad I was the human in the loop and was able to
nice.
Get there. But Ada, Carrie,
the tales
and
I
Megan.
could tell you as a glass what speech recognition has done to my voice.
Yes.
Put the
that
link to
sketch
the lift
with the
video in the
elevator.
show notes there.
I just
All right.
wanna,
Yeah, Ada, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Alex, Alex G, I grew up in Mexico and I went to school in the United States, in Texas. And the first day that my mom signed me up for school, they started to call me Ada. And my mom came the next day and she said, La niña se llama Ada. Her name is Ada. So I have to like do my own family justice and
Absolutely.
just get that officially on the record.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yes, we'll change it in post. But no, that's of course important. The names are important. They are.
They are really important. Yeah, and I to my kids all the time as well. So you have a right, for people to get your name right. Exactly. Super interesting. Basically, Ada, you and the team, kind of from the manual to the podcast, and the vocal fries from the podcast to the book. I think that's amazing, and I'm really looking forward to that book. I don't know. Do you have an ETA already, or should we not ask about it? When's it going to come out? Probably.
I am
the
holding up
future.
the process a bit with my
No pressure. I'm
emotions.
really just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know yet.
We have a very
Maybe
lovely editor.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a little rule here that I don't know. Someone who's written 2 books, you never ask someone their age, and you never ask them when the book will be finished.
Ah, yeah. See,
That's fair.
My
That
bad.
is
My
very
bad.
fair.
It's just I'm so curious to see it. That's all. I'm really excited about it. Cool.
Age
Okay.
rule, to be honest, Jonathan. We have to talk about that again. I think we should ask someone the age. I think there shouldn't be shame associated with age.
Exactly.
But I am okay with
I've
the
been
other
29
the other
plus something for a number of years now. The just plus number just gets bigger and bigger.
Well, why? You have such a baby face anyway. Doesn't matter.
Oh,
But it's funny you should mention that because the age thing will come up in the next voice memo. But before we get to that, Ada, Carrie, and Megan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, you should really. So again, for all the hosts we have on tonight, we'll have the links in the show notes. Alex G is going to make sure of that, right? So we'll have all the links
We're gonna link
to the
all
shows and
your
other
shows.
projects. Yeah. And with the vocal fries, we did a crossover before, so you can listen back to that as well to learn more. Great. So thanks to the 3 of you for joining us. You're welcome to stick around, of course, if you have time. And with that, we'll move on to a little message from Yves Baudeux and Corinne McKay, whose podcast, Speaking of Translation, is currently on a bit of a high because they were really the OG podcasters, I think, in our space. So let's see what they have prepared for us. Just a second. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Yves Baudeux from the podcast Speaking of Translation. And I'm Corinne McKay. And we are thrilled to be here with Troublesome Terps today. Thanks so much for inviting us. And we're going to share an anecdote about interpreting. As luck would have it, Corinne spent the last school year pursuing a master's in conference interpreting at Glendon College in Toronto. So she is going to enlighten us with a little story about that. And I, too, am super excited to hear more about her experience there and what she learned in the big picture. So, Corinne, have at it.
Thank you. So Eve and I are the co-hosts of the podcast Speaking of Translation, which we hosted monthly for 13 years. And, we've now put the podcast on hiatus for a little bit, but all of our archives are still there at speakingoftranslation.com. So my message to all of you Troublesome Terps listeners would be basically, if I can do it, you can do it. I've been a freelance translator since 2002, and I always really wanted to pursue interpreting, but it was logistically really difficult until my now almost 19-year-old daughter was older. So in 2018, I had this moment where I thought, okay, this is now or never. I need to pursue my interpreting ambitions now, or I'm never going to do it. And after a year and a half of intensive studying, I passed the state of Colorado, where I live in the US, state of Colorado French court interpreter exam in 2019. And then during the most recent school year in 2020-2021, as Eve said, I did a master's in conference interpreting, English A, French B at Glendon College, which is part of York University in Toronto, Canada. So my message to you is, when I started pursuing interpreting, I could not even shadow. So you guys probably know what shadowing is, but it is the most basic form of simultaneous interpreting, or the most basic skill you learn to do simultaneous interpreting, which is where you simply repeat after the speaker in the same language. So you are not going from one language to another, just repeating and trying to mirror the speaker's pacing and intonation. So when I started doing that, I had to either shadow something like the news in slow French, something that was deliberately slow, or I had to slow YouTube videos down to 0.75 speed. And then I progressed to very slow speakers. And I honestly, when I was learning consecutive interpreting, I'd panic if someone talked for more than about one sentence. And now I am, after studying interpreting for about 3 years, I'm definitely still on the path, far from perfect, a lot to learn. But I did pass the exit exams for my conference interpreting masters, which included a 5-minute consecutive speech. And we actually practiced up to 10 minutes and did some really fast simultaneous speakers and survived. So my message to you would be, of course, there are people who are incredibly talented at interpreting and pick it up faster, but really for most of us, it is almost all about learning the techniques, tons and tons of practice, learning to stay calm in a high stress environment, and really committing to be that person's voice in another language. And I think that for a lot of would-be interpreters, certainly for me, I think that improving and maintaining your B and C languages are actually the biggest challenge. So for myself, I'm what I say is a real French B, which means I don't live in a French-speaking country. I have no French contact in my daily life. So maintaining my B language is probably my biggest challenge in interpreting. And as luck would have it, Eve wrote a book on that very topic, and it is called Maintaining Your Second Language. And it, not only because Eve is my friend and colleague, but because really you need this book. Again, it's called Maintaining Your Second Language. I think the title speaks for itself. And if you haven't read it, I would strongly encourage you to pick up that book, because some of the techniques that I used the most throughout my interpreting program, I learned from Eve's book. So Eve, did you want to say anything else about the book or where people can look for it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks for doing that. There, you can get it on in Kindle format and Apple Books and in hard copy. So yeah, and you can also on my website, it tells more information about this little video and stuff. So that's BourdieuInternational.com. But also, I wanted to say thank you, Corinne, for talking about that. I love the kind of your story, because even though we look 20.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're not. And I do like the idea, I love that idea. And I want everyone to take that away from what you talked about too, is that, even as you aren't, even though maybe we're not traditional student age, you can have these specific dreams and kind of make them happen and go back. And then even for me, looking at you when you first started the master's in conference interpreting, I thought.
And you wondered what I was thinking.
No, just the time, like that's already done. Yes. I mean, that you put your time to doing it and then you did it and the time went by fast. It went by fast for me because I wasn't the one studying it. Yeah. But I mean, the idea that it's totally doable. It doesn't take, necessarily 8 years of your life to get to if you put a plan together to whatever your dreams might be, listeners, having to do with T&I or otherwise, Corinne has shown us that you can, you can make that plan and get it done. That's what I think. For me, I have the hard time sometimes executing stuff. So to me, it shows shows that you can make this plan and have it get it done. And what I meant was it's already completed and I can't believe it. It went by so fast.
I know thanks for that point, Even. That's correct. I talked to someone from our local Translators Association the other day who said to me exactly the same thing. Like, I'm sure it didn't go fast when you were the one in the program, but this woman said, I feel like it was not that long ago that you were thinking about applying and now you are already done and have your master's. And yes, for all of you out there who are not 22, I'm going to be 49 for 21 more days.
Congratulations!
and
big birthday coming up.
And after that, I have a big birthday coming. And I don't think I was the oldest person in my program. And there were many, many people who were not 22. So do not let that stop you.
Yeah, great. Awesome.
Okay. I think that's what we got for you.
Yeah. Thanks again to Troublesome Terps for inviting us to be guests on this special episode, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I just love the
Yay.
chemistry between the two. So I hope the podcast comes back from the hiatus at some point. But we'll just keep cracking with our next panel right here. And for that, I'd like to
Yes.
call on our next guests, which would be Kate Hamilton, who has been on the show before.
Hi.
Good evening, Kate. It's great to have you back. And I have to say this live again. Congratulations on the Master of Science that you got today,
Yay!
yesterday. When was it?
Congratulations.
Thank resonate easy to saying because I'm 42
Okay.
and I started, like a couple like when I was 40. And yeah, you're never too old to go and study something that you're really interested in. I'm doing now, so I'll be, the oldest person kind of graduating or something, but that's what I thought. But actually, you're not. Everybody's there. It's about the learning. It's not about their age. So
Exactly.
If anything, I always find
Yeah.
it really impressive when someone who's out of the, let's say, traditional college age and a little older, deeper in life, to still go back to college, because it shows that you want to learn, that you're still driven, that
Yeah.
you have ambitions, and that you're not just, settled. I mean, it's also nice to, be settled in a certain way in your life. Of course, I'm not saying that, we all need some comfort, but I think it's great. Yeah, that's what I want to do as well. Just, continuous
yeah, no, I
learning.
think go for it. And
Yeah.
also being a bit older, you can. I think I'm better at thinking. You've got a bit more
Gravity, yeah.
perspective. You
But let's-
can look at stuff perspective. It's not all new to you. So.
Totally true. Yeah, but let's welcome our second guest on this panel, which would be Michaela Haller, conference interpreter from Germany and host of the 2.56 square meter podcast. Welcome, Michaela.
Thank you. Very well done. Not everybody gets that, the title of my podcast as smoothly.
Yeah,
as you
I've
just
seen
did.
it so often these past few days that I can now correctly remember it. But for those of the listeners, I guess, who haven't got any clue what that number means, tell them what it's about.
Yeah, that is the inner size of a ISO interpreting booth. It's really small. I found that out
sounds
when I was
tiny.
searching for
Quite
it
cozy.
is tiny, and I was searching for a name, and then I was like, okay, how big is the booth actually? And it's really small. So that's
tiny.
the workspace we're in lots of the time.
But you know what's funny now with Corona? We usually all get one booth per person, because of social distancing and stuff.
A single one, right? Or
A single one,
yeah.
so like a double person booth per interpreter. And there have been these rare occasions when you do get to sit with a colleague in one booth, and we're both just sitting there, and it's like, how did this ever work? How were we ever able to fit two people in one
I
interpreting
know.
booth and do any work here? So
I know. I was just in a room. Actually, it was not a booth, but it was a whole room. My colleague and I had for work, and we had two laptops and mics, and it was like, we didn't have enough space. It was a huge
Yeah.
table. In the end, we just put one laptop away and worked together on one because we just couldn't manage. I don't know how we ever did that.
It can feel really claustrophobic. That's totally
Yeah.
true.
Well,
Yeah. But I
absolutely.
mean, sort of going back to the topic of learning, I guess. Kate,
Yeah.
your podcast is called Language Revolution, and
Mm-hmm.
was sort of learning curiosity, was that what got you started on your show? Because you've had some quite cool guests on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's quite a selfish podcast. I ask people to come on because I'm interested in what I've got a question or an itch or something I want to kind of scratch, and then I think, who's the best person to answer this question? And then I ask them, and so I've spoken to David Crystal, who I'm obviously, like all linguists, like a massive fan of his, and a few really interesting, cool people who they've been very generous with their time, but it's been about like learning. And my kind of journey as a sort of a linguist has been sort of running along parallel, I guess, with the podcast. So yeah, and one of my favorite episodes was about the history of language education. So that's really interesting. And like the 16th century England and Dutch dictionaries at the time, and how the Italian tutors would have like a feud in London about who was the best Italian tutor, or who had the most recent, who'd been to the Parisian court most recently, and therefore their French was superior.
I can't imagine
Just the
language
usual
people having
things.
feuds. I've never seen language people having feuds.
No, and I was like, it's just like YouTube. It's YouTube. YouTube, but sort of 15th, 1600s. Yeah.
So hey guys, I want to address something here today, like that kind of the drama.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool to see there's a huge variety, and I think that's true for your show as well, Michaela. You've covered a lot of ground as well already, and you had sort of a little bit about the business of interpreting and how to get started and what it's like in specific disciplines of interpreting, I guess. But you also talked about a few topics that are sort of more about language in general, I guess, like. One thing that I think a lot of interpreters are acutely aware of these days is the role of English as a lingua franca, I guess, and a lot of delegates using English, and the number of languages used in the meetings that we work at is shrinking. What was your takeaway from sort of the language focused episodes that you had, or from this English one? Were you a little bit afraid your job might get less interesting, maybe, or what would you take away from that?
Well, as an English interpreter, I'm not so afraid of English being spoken at conferences because that ensures my work. I
Fair point.
I see the problems, or I see the fear of interpreters working with less widespread languages, or just let it be the normal European languages we had at conferences just a couple of years ago, just Italian, French. Also, these colleagues complained to me that there are less conferences where those languages are actually needed. So I am confronted with a variety of English, actually, and I'm not only a conference interpreter where you have a certain variety of English, but I also work as a court interpreter, and I see an extreme variety of English that I have sometimes trouble understanding, actually. And so this is something that I very aware of, that there's so much more English than what I learned or what I'm used to, because also conference speak is sort of always the same kind of, but English, African accents, Asian accents, Indian English, which I really have to concentrate a lot to get the message across in the end.
Yeah, and Kate, one of the topics that we discussed on our joint episode, I think, was a little bit related to this. So it was about bilingualism and multilingualism. So as someone who's also very interested in how language develops, how would you see that? Because it seems to be a little bit contradictory. There's a growing awareness, I think, for bilingualism and multilingualism. At least I like to believe that. But on the other hand, there's a big movement towards using English as a lingua franca. Or maybe that isn't a contradiction. Maybe it's just two things happening in parallel. What would you say to that?
Well, that's an question, isn't it? So, I mean, English has really grown and really spread. There's billions of English speakers now. And actually, it's kind of moved away from what you might call the original places where English came from, the UK, the US, and, CACRU's inner circle of English. And now you've got almost no connection between sort of the outer circles of English and the original, the British English, for example. Like if you're in an international meeting and there's a couple of British people there, it's terrible because everybody speaks in idioms and metaphors and doesn't really say anything straightforward, and it's actually quite difficult to understand. That kind of idiomatic English, I think it can be, just not very plain and simple. In terms of from my perspective, it's the UK has a bit of a problem in that English is spoken everywhere. So when I'm teaching kids in school, you have to persuade them it's worth learning French, because actually, it's not just about whether you will go to a cafe in France and order a coffee in French. It's actually about culture and life and people and interesting stuff, and just those moments you won't have if you don't speak the language, because you can go pretty much anywhere in the world, can't you? and say, have a transaction on a basic level in English. And what we're losing out on is that sort of ability to actually connect with people. And like here, you already mentioned about how interpreters and linguists, we're people. We like to connect with people, don't we? And yeah, I think languages are really important for that. So I guess sort of my angle on it is that I think we need to really persevere at promoting language learning, not for the sake of that sort of transactional, instrumental usage. It's not just about achieving a goal in that language. It's about, making a step towards another person's culture, or just, understanding the art, or getting into the literature or the films in the original language, because you get a lot more out of it. And there is a bit of a movement in Britain, like towards bilingual, like it's something that we talk about. It's more of a talking point. We've got 22% of kids are multilingual in school in Britain, but generally it's not really, we haven't really shifted the English hegemony. It's still, it's a mindset that British people feel like they can't do languages, which I think is a bit sad. So we're trying to break that down. Actually, everybody's a linguist. That's what I always say. From birth, we're all linguists. Even if you only speak English, you speak varieties of English. You've got dialectal differences. You don't speak to your boss the same as you speak to your mum or whatever. So yeah, I think we need to talk about language and the connections that languages have. And, yeah.
I think, Kate, what you just said reminded me about English or British speakers or English speakers increasing a language barrier at international conferences. I just read a tweet the other day from the climate conference. I think there was an English speaker, and he made a speech and it was full of cultural references and referring to English researchers and very cultural specific. And someone was complaining like, nobody can understand this, nobody can interpret this even, because it's so specific. And I thought that was really interesting what you just pointed out, that this is not
it can
only
just muddy, it can make it more difficult, can't it? It's just, it's important not to be like too obtuse and referring to something that only another person who saw the same program as you get.
You don't want to keep moving the goalposts until the cows come home.
And Kate, I like what you said about that it's difficult sometimes to convey to people that language is more about, it's not just, then you can order a coffee or, you can get a degree or these different things, but that it's really about that it should be something very lively. It's about life. It's about people. It has a lot of culture and history in it. And for me, for example, I speak English with my husband because he's Irish, and he doesn't speak a lot of German yet. He's working on it. And I sometimes try to convince the people, convey to people why it's important to me that he also learns German, because they're saying like, well, your English is so good. Why does he need to learn German? But it's like, well, but then there will always be a part of me that he cannot know, because I can show him certain things in my country and everything, but there's certain things that are so embedded in the language. And there's also certain things that I only got about his culture by living in Ireland for like almost a decade, So there is so much more to language than just the pure linguistic part, which I'm also a fan of because I'm also a linguistics nerd. But, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, no, like you're completely right. If your husband doesn't sort of get to a certain point with German, he's not going to like unlock the last level, is he? So,
exactly. Yeah. The end game,
The end game.
Yeah. It's really, how do you truly know someone if you don't like, there's just some expressions like, it's really popular now to have those untranslatable words books, isn't it? But it's not so much like there isn't a direct translation. It's just that there is a cultural thing here. There's like a little nugget of something tied up in that word, and you can't know it unless you understand that word. So it's important.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I wanted to come back to what you said about the whole sort of people thing and direct interaction with people. And Michaela, I mentioned that there's still a pandemic going on at the moment, so I'm kind of reluctant to speak about the new normal. But How have things sort of shaped up for you? I mean, you probably do most of your interviews remotely. You probably do a lot of work remotely as well these days. So what does it look like for you? What's the new reality of being an interpreter, I guess?
Well, the reality of being a podcaster and an interpreter is pretty similar currently. So there are similarities. I started out the podcast right before the pandemic, and I imagined, so I'm still starting out. I'm in my second year now. I imagined like traveling around with my mic, interviewing interesting people, and just being on the road and something like that. And then I recorded one episode like that, and then COVID came. I was like, okay, I need a new plan, and I started to record remotely, and I had a good mic actually when everything started out, when everybody was searching for mics and headphones and everything. So yeah, I worked a lot remotely. There were times in Germany in the summertime when we could do on-site work, and a lot of my clients wanted to do on-site work as soon as it was possible. But then, yeah, now we're going back into a bad place right now. So this is the place I am at, my home studio right now, mostly.
Yeah. But interesting to see these parallels between podcasting and interpreting. That's definitely something I think, all of us here can sort of confirm as well. And Kate, what was the experience like now for your for the MS, the degree you got? Was it very different from your initial degree? What was it like to do that in a pandemic, I guess?
Well, I guess we were quite lucky. We got the first term in person, wearing masks, and because it's a graduate degree, there was a small class, so it wasn't like too difficult to spread out and have the seminars in person. But then the whole UK locked down last Christmas, and then we were at home from about November through to March, I think. So that was tough. I mean, I'm a mum. I've got 3 kids, and so I was doing my degree. And I had to lock myself in this room where I am now and say, that's it, I'm studying for a few hours and, that kind of thing. So I think, I think it was, it definitely wasn't what I was expecting when I signed up for it. The idea is I like people, I want to meet new people. And if you go somewhere like Oxford, there's you're bound to find people who are on the same wavelength, and it would be cool to hang out in libraries and that sort of thing. But actually, probably because I was not distracted by socializing and chatting, I got a lot more work done. So it had a bonus effect, like unintentionally, that I got a good grade. But I think we've kind of worked out how to do hybrid learning now, so that people can sign on in, like India, and they can be in the seminar with us. And so at the moment we're kind of in the room, but there's also people signing in online on the screen. So I guess that might be like some of your conferences that you're at. And the tech has rapidly improved. We now have like microphones all around the room. So if you're online, you can actually hear what people at the back of the class are saying. So, yeah.
I would also like to add to that bonus effect I had from the pandemic, because I think we all need good news sometimes. And I had a completely different plan in the beginning, but the pandemic had the effect that I had guests on my podcast I would not have had before, or I would not have ever thought about inviting if I had pursued that original plan. I talked to Judy Jenner in Las Vegas. I mean, I don't think I would have gotten on the plane with my mic, and so I kind of enjoyed.
To get a really good sponsor, I guess.
Yes.
That would have been a very involved podcast episode.
I know.
That's my kind of.
Very committed.
Talking about remote guests, this is the moment when I can kind of get my own back for a few months ago. So our last panel is with Mireia Perez, and I was on Mireia's podcast. It reminds me of the of early Lang FM episodes. It's got that kind of relaxed but deep thinking podcast, Mireia's podcast. Since I've already said about Mireia's podcast, would you like to interview your podcast
But before we come to the next panel, I wanted to at least thank Kate and Michaela for joining us, and for sharing a little bit of your experience.
Thanks for having
So
me.
let's not go too quickly. So thanks for joining us, and of course check out the Language Revolution and 2,5 Quadratmeter. I suppose there's a lot of good stuff for you to listen to. I know actually for a fact, and there's probably lots of episodes coming up as well. So thank you for joining us. And before, Jonathan, hold your horses just for a little bit longer before we get to the next panel. We have one final. No, actually, we don't. Oh, sorry. No, you were actually right. Well, I'll just shut up. Sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was going to say I have just taken some, so I might be a little bit too quick, even quicker than usual. So Tamara, would you like to introduce us a bit to your podcast, Message Across?
Sure. Glad that when you said you're getting your own back for a few months ago, it wasn't something I'd done unwittingly. You said as I go over to Tamara and Maria. But yeah, so Message Across, similarly to what some other people have said, it's that whole scratching where you're itching. So people I knew who I'd always thought, I want to know more about how you got where you are. What's your story? A lot of them were people who'd taught me on the master. And rather than just, walk up to them at the university and say, tell me about your life story, I thought that would have more kudos if I invited them to the podcast to do so. I'm glad I did, because actually these were people who I'd worked after the MA. I stayed on and worked on the ORSIT project in the department, the online training material stuff. So I'd worked quite closely with some of these people and saw them as colleagues as well as former tutors. And actually, it wasn't on the podcast recording asking the questions that I found out things about them. So messaging called Getting Into It, and it really was about other interpreters and how they got to do what they're doing. And so kind of maybe students or people who are trying to get into the industry at the time. The series that I've got in the pipeline next is more looking at other professionals as well as some translators and interpreters of that, that baby, but also it's just to try and feed that same intellectual curiosity that I think almost all interpreters have, which is why we're doing completely different topics within the same day. So hopefully that's going to be really exciting too.
And Miria, can you tell us a bit about the background of Brand the Interpreter? It does sound like to make sure that you know their identity and they can't get away.
Yeah, there's no hot irons, that's for sure, for the podcaster to be a part of it. But yeah, Brand the Interpreter basically was something that I wanted to put together so that I could, just like Tamara just said, learn the stories of other language professionals and basically learn from them. And, particularly those that were pretty hidden away. And I wanted to see how language professionals were in all the different specializations and just having them share their stories on an audio only platform, mainly because I was, pretty comfortable with audio only. So I went for the podcast, and it's been quite a journey, and I've met incredible people along the way, Jonathan included, just being able to learn a little bit more about the different specializations and language professionals that are out there. It turned out just, I was thinking just for the California commuters that, travel for such a long period of time to work, to get to the office. And it turned out to be something, global, which is amazing to say.
Mm-hmm. And if you've had this idea of really wanting to hear people's stories, Maria, with a name like Brand the Interpreter, it really sounds like you're getting into the business end of interpreting. Has that come out on all episodes, or have you had some content that you didn't expect?
I think there's always because it's not really scripted. I mean, I have a guide that I can go by with regards to backup questions in the event that it stales, right? But I think that as the conversations come up, there's a little bit of related always, just because most folks are freelancers out there, and so these are sort of topics that we get into that are not necessarily coming across in the education aspect. So when you're going through the training, these are things that may not necessarily be brought up, and it's one of those you learn as you go type of thing. And so we bring in, the language professional that has gone through it, that has maybe made the mistakes and, like gotten themselves up, dusted themselves off, and is now able to share, let's not do this part, maybe give some suggestions to others in the field.
Tamara, did you find that with your first series that you were learning from people's mistakes as much as from their achievements?
I think an element of that, the interesting thing is for me, and seeing that that people often, especially when I was interviewing, were people who were very much established because they were tutors when I got into it. These are people who've still been through that process of, we all, a bit like we all started somewhere, and we all have our questions and our doubts. And even speaking to Katrina was one of the earlier people I interviewed. It's actually later on that I thought, well, I've been teaching for so long, I'm a good interpreter as well, why don't I focus on my interpreting career? So, some of the things we question ourselves, which way is my career going, what decisions am I going to make? It was just really encouraging to hear that, and to hopefully share with others that you don't need to panic if you haven't got it all together, or you're not sure quite what your next steps are. So that people shared their worst mistakes, which really not open to do. But yeah, the whole process was really eye-opening.
There's a third series for you, your worst career mistake to date.
See how easy it is to get the guests for that one.
Maybe that would be I don't know if that would be a career mistake. But this idea of sharing stories, I know not long after I graduated, there was a real push for interpreter marketing and interpreter branding and the business side of interpreting. And it's interesting that both of you have come to that topic, but come at it from a very different angle. Maria, are you comfortable that we're now kind of making interpreting more human? Because I've seen some of the stories that have come up in your podcast. Was that something to kind of humanize interpreting, or did it just happen when you start interviewing people?
What I really was aiming for was bringing the human, the actual individual out. That's why the whole branding, it's actually, I think it was, his name was Tucker that mentioned it when he talked about how it was that authenticity and that visibility, right, of being out and promoting the individual behind the work, which we don't oftentimes get to see, not just ourselves within the industry, but I think just the general public. Who is the individual? And so now that, there's all this conversation about AI, or this lack of, translators in the field for X, Y, and Z type of work. And it's like, we're out there in the masses, but people don't know about us. Why? So my whole intention was just humanizing it in the sense of bringing the individual to the forefront, as opposed to doing this, behind the scenes work. And of course, their stories along with it. Mm-hmm.
And Tamara, what was it like? Because I can only imagine what it'd be like from you, the lecturers who lectured me. I had this strange experience about a year ago where I go into a remote studio for a job, and then the double booth was my English to French interpreting tutor. And I'm sorry, the first time that happens, you're always going to get scared. I can only imagine what it'd be like to have her on a podcast. How quickly did you get over the, oh my goodness, I'm interviewing the people who taught me?
I think from that perspective, because I worked in the department for a couple of years by then, and I think I did need that transition period when that actually happened. And I think one of them actually had to tell me, it's okay, you can chill out. I think for me, actually the person who I didn't know was the one that I was most, not intimidated by her, but intimidated by who she was. And that was interviewing Amanda Goldsworthy, because I'd come across her through her BBC interview like a few years before. I approached her thinking, this is get through to her, and for her to come back and say, oh no, I'd really love to do that. I think that's something that's really needed right now with everything that's going on. That was just a relief for me. I really able to interview and speak to and hear from and share with my listeners from someone who'd inspired me so much. And what makes it easier for me was realizing, even with her, there wasn't a person who I interviewed who I get completely what you're saying. That really resonates. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've had those kind of experiences. And even, listening to Trouble Terps guests this evening, listening to the whole conversations, you're like, yeah, exactly. Yes, I get it. It just helps that whole connection about tonight. So that is something that it's part of what's made it really special. I'm really glad that it's been a real wonderful experience to have that connection. No matter who they are, we're all humans, we have things in common, same job. So yeah.
It is lovely to see how human people are. Is there anyone, now Maria and Tamara, is there anyone on your list that you would love to interview that you think they're never going to say yes?
I'm glad my eye on a couple people after today's podcastival. I don't know if they'll say yes. So you might get an email from me.
I've got a few. I mean, especially now that I'm delving into areas as well as interpreting and translation for the next series. I think some of them might be where I'm trying to tap into my nearest and dearest and say, be on my podcast. And I think some of them might say no, but I'm not going to tell you any reason, just so that if they do. Yeah. By the way, Jonathan, if you're listening, this was one of them. But yeah, there are a couple who I'd be very impressed if they.
Noam Chomsky's waiting for your email.
That would be amazing.
He probably has a huge inbox, Noam Chomsky.
Well,
I wonder if he checks his own email. But
I wouldn't know what to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Sometimes that people are literally so famous. I mean, you wouldn't even know where to start necessarily and what to ask them. Not necessarily because you're starstruck, because it's just, I don't know. They've been in so many
just where to
interviews,
start.
and
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Where do you
Such a
even start?
big-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Great. So Tamara and Maria, thank you so much for joining us and for introducing the audience to your shows. So it sounded like tomorrow we can look forward to a new season coming soon-ish
Yes.
at some point. So
Yes.
please keep us posted. We'll be happy to share it once it's out, and we're also looking forward to your future episodes, Mireia. And we'll be curious to find out who you will be emailing and successfully then. So good luck with all those requests.
Thank you,
Great.
guys.
So yeah, thanks. Before we wrap up, we have now, for real, we have one final voice message
Now
from two lovely ladies that we have had on the show before, namely Veronica Michelis and Madalena Sanchez-Sampalo. So let's just dive to what they
Hi,
have prepared.
my name is Madalena Sanchez Zampalo, and I'm a freelance Spanish and certified Portuguese to English medical and life sciences translator. I'm also the owner of a small but mighty translation agency and a health and wellness copywriter. I live in sunny Southern California with my husband, our 5-year-old daughter, and our bulldog Lucy.
And I'm Veronica de Michelis. I am a certified English to Russian translator. I specialize in website and app localization, marketing, and corporate communications. And I also teach localization at Houston Community College. I live in Texas with my husband, 2 kids who are 5 and 9, our beagle Maggie, and our chinchilla Larry.
And we love Larry. And together we host the Smart Habits for Translators podcast. We started the podcast in October 2019, and we've now released over 50 episodes, and we have listeners in over 110 countries. We met through the American Translators Association, and as we got to know one another better, we realized that this conversation about building better habits to help us grow our businesses, having a fulfilling home life, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle was something we came back to time and again. And we figured a lot of other translators are probably interested in having these conversations too.
Yeah, so every 2 weeks, we release a new episode covering a topic related to smart habits. Everything from conquering your to-do list without burning out to building your business in a way that makes sense to you. Some weeks it's just the 2 of us, and other weeks we bring in guests to interview related to specific smart habits. What started as a way to share honest conversations between friends with the rest of the translation and interpreting community has evolved into a real passion project of ours. And we are so happy to hear when our listeners tell us that they find our podcast helpful and inspiring.
Yes, and our idea for the podcast stems from the topic of establishing clarity and boundaries between your work and personal life, and building smart habits that will help you along the way. After all, We all want one thing, and that is to feel that our work is rewarding and supports the lifestyle we want to have. But getting there is not easy, especially for freelancers. We're familiar with these challenges, and that's why we cover them on the podcast.
Right. And we believe in the importance of the translation and interpreting community coming together, supporting each other, collaborating, and getting stronger together. So we're always happy to highlight our colleagues on the podcast and see what we can learn from them. But we also invite experts from other fields so that we can all gain new insights and ideas. We are so happy to see how many podcasts there are now for translators, interpreters, and other word nerds and language geeks, and we're so excited to be part of this special tribe.
All right, now let's share our funny or memorable stories related to languages. Veronica, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I studied English since I was 5. I don't know if I mentioned I grew up in Russia, in Moscow. And so by the time I started my first job at 18 years old, I thought I was pretty fluent in English. Of course, I grew up in Soviet Russia and had never left the country or even talked to a single foreigner at the time. But I had been getting straight A's in all English classes, and my teachers, who also never traveled or used their English in real life interactions with other people, they kept telling me how amazing my English was. I was like a star student. So on my first day on the job, I was manning the reception desk at the Moscow office of an international oil and gas company. And I thought to myself, answering phone calls, easy peasy, this will be a breeze. And my first call was from a gentleman with a heavy Norwegian accent, and I did not understand a single thing. I think I asked him to repeat several times, and the more I asked, the more mad he got at me. I was so terrified that I waited for a long time before accepting the next call. And then the heavy French accent was even worse. I was just mortified. I could not understand any of the callers. I didn't know why it's so difficult, because my English is supposed to be really good, and they had trouble understanding me. So everyone was upset. Thankfully, they gave me another chance in that new job, and I actually worked there for 18 years, just transitioning from one position to the next. But that was my first and only in-house job that lasted for a long time. And I did get better with time. My English improved. But that was a lesson I remembered forever. Be humble. You really don't know as much as you think you do. And also, studying a language doesn't make you fluent. It's not like it ever stops at a certain time and you're like, perfect from that on. You have to consistently work on your language, do it all the time, be receptive to feedback, and be curious. And I have so much respect and admiration for my colleagues, because I understand how much work goes into our jobs as translators and interpreters. So what about you?
Oh, that's such a good story. And yet, yeah, your English is pretty superb. So I can't imagine you not understanding people, but I get it. Phone calls can be hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so my story is funny, but also mortifying, if I'm being honest. So I grew up as a heritage Spanish speaker. My father was from Spain, and I went to school actually to study Spanish because I wanted to use it in my career. So not so much how to speak, but, as an academic. So I wanted to be a professor of Spanish linguistics. So when I met my now husband, I was starting my master's degree in this area, and he was also studying at the same time at the same university, but as an exchange student from Brazil. And so I was very interested in Portuguese, and he offered to take time out of his schedule a few times a week to tutor me. So if you've ever studied Portuguese and it's not your first language, then you probably know how difficult the nasal sounds are for most non-native speakers. So one day he was teaching me various vocabulary words for foods, and I have a love and a knack for languages, I think. So I felt like this lesson couldn't possibly be hard, right? And of course, I was trying to impress this guy who was also trying to impress me by teaching me, but so with my language learning skills, right? Well, so we got to the word bread in Portuguese. And so if you are a Portuguese speaker, you know where this is going. And so the word for bread in Portuguese is pão. And this word is not the easiest to pronounce for all non-native speakers. And I was reading a sentence with the word pão, and I forgot to make the very necessary nasal sound. So he starts laughing uncontrollably. And of course, I had no idea why. And he was laughing so much that he couldn't even speak, and he turned bright red. And then he explained to me that the word pronounced without a nasal sound is basically a slang term in Brazil for a male body part. So you can imagine I nearly fell out of my chair of embarrassment, and I definitely never made that mistake again. So it obviously worked out because he married me a few years later. But I went on to study and teach Portuguese, and now it's one of my working languages as a professional translator. But like you said, wow.
Yeah.
Talk about a humbling and mortifying experience. And just thinking about it now, like I'm sweating already. So yeah. So anyway, that's it from us. Thanks so much for inviting us to your Podcastival. We're honored to be a part of the event.
Yes, thank you so much, Troublesome Terps, for organizing this special celebration of language-related podcasts. We can't wait to listen to all the wonderful podcasts, and we hope that you will check out ours, Smart Habits for Translators, on your favorite podcasting app or at smarthabitsfortranslators.com.
That is a mortifying story.
I can relate to both of those stories.
I think we've all been there to
all
some
been
extent.
I just want to share mine briefly. Not that anybody
go
else,
ahead.
but you're
Sure.
gonna have to listen to me more.
Sure.
So I was in Guatemala with my friend. Her family is from there, and I had learned some Spanish in school, but I wasn't, that like I thought I spoke some Spanish, but yeah. Anyway, I got on pretty well, and I got more confident. And then we were out with her cousins, the cinema, I think, and it was really warm. And so I said to her male cousin, "Estoy caliente." He was looking at me like, what? I was like, it's very hot in here, So, yeah, for those who don't speak Spanish like me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it means, from what I understand, on the one hand, it means I'm hot and also I'm horny. So, yeah, and not I'm warm at all. So, and I said with a lot of emphasis as well, really like, whew, estoy caliente, like that. So,
I mean, going to the cinema will do that to you,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. If you do something
What were
like
you
that,
watching?
you have to go all in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Gusto.
Right. So I
Oh,
think Jonathan
goodness.
to move out to take care of the kids. But Alex and Sarah, if you give us a favorite moment or highlight in a few moments, that would be great. And meanwhile, I will try to, I don't know, do a little bit of a summary, just a few of the nice things we've had as we're wrapping up this podcast. Well, one thing that really amazed me also already when we prepared the show was the huge variety and topics and different perspectives we have in this space. Again, terrible word, but it's true. Not only for but also for translation, of course, and localization, and language justice and sign language. It's really been wonderful to see the podcasting little niche of podcasting grow, which was also one of the reasons why we wanted to do this in the first place. So this list, sort of when we prepared, kept getting longer, which was great. Hard to organize, but still wonderful. So we've heard from first today, and Florian is still with us, which is great. Thanks for sticking around. So we heard about a few recent language industry developments. We spoke about over-rehearsed web online events and even deep fakes. So that was great to get into. Language justice and sociolinguistics. Ada is still with us as well. Great. Thanks for sticking around. So we talked about social justice warriors and Karens and what have you. So that was great too. Do check out those shows as well. They're great. What it's like to be an interpreter and to do a Master of Science in a pandemic. Quite a challenge, but we also learned that it can have its upsides, because as a podcaster you already have great audio equipment, which comes in handy when you have to interpret on an online platform, for example. So that's great too. Swings and roundabouts, I guess. And then we heard about I think interpreter biographies, what it means to be an interpreter in this language, and about the business of interpreting from Mireia and Tamara, who are also still with us. Thank you. And also, I guess, a bucket list guests, if that exists, and what it's like to approach, maybe not idols, but, big wigs in the industry, I guess. And just now, lastly, we heard about how sharing, failures can also help us grow and be humble and move on with our lives, which was really fantastic. So Alex and Sarah, I don't know if you have any last words, I guess.
It's really hard to choose what my favorite part was.
We covered a
Because
lot of
first of all,
ground, didn't we?
yeah,
We
I love
surely
all
did.
of the videos and the audio messages. They were so fun. People put a lot of effort into them. You could tell to keep it, still like relatively short but interesting and fun. So that was really, really great. But I also loved all the discussions that happened here live, and that everyone, had something good to say, and it felt very natural and organic. I think my favorite kind of has to be the video with the Irish Sign Language. On the one hand, because, shout out to the Irish. I'm not Irish, but my name is very Irish.
Great crack.
I'm a fake Irish, and I lived there for a long time. And I'm a German disguised as an Irish person. No, and I love the accessibility element as well. So one of my colleagues, actually at NIMSY, that I wanted to mention earlier, Belen, she is an expert to everything to do with accessibility. She has a PhD in that topic as well. She talks about not just captioning, but all of the accessibility stuff to do with languages all day long. So reach out to her if you want to talk about this more, because she's the real expert there. And I love all that stuff. I love learning more from Belen, and I love learning more from the hosts of the Lean podcast. And I think it's such a wonderful idea to have sign language not even sign language interpreting, really. They're doing from what I understand, they're more like doing the podcast in sign language and then speaking over it, right? And then having the captions, or whichever way. But it's just great that they're covering all of this. So yeah, they are the winners for me, but I loved all of it. It was really hard to choose.
Everyone's a winner
I
tonight.
fully agree. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty fantastic smorgasbord of language industry nuggets. But I think what I found really interesting is that everybody is coming at sort of what seems like a relatively small field, right? Like the language industry. Oh, it seems so specific. I'm doing conference interpreting. I'm doing like this very specialized like translation. I'm doing this particular one thing here, and it seems like such a small thing, but we're all coming at this industry, and everybody's covering something completely different and coming from it from a completely individual perspective. And yet everything is sort of, we all have something in common, and we all share sort of this passion for connections. And I thought it was just a really inspiring. I don't want to sound corny, but it was just really nice to see, because it's so rare to see so many people from not from the industry, because you used to have these industry events, but from so many different perspectives coming together. And that was really nice. I really enjoyed that a lot. Honestly, that was really cool. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that was great was all admitted to podcasting being a vanity thing to do, which is totally okay, because we share it with the world, and I think what counts is to let everybody participate in the such as tonight. So yeah, again, thanks to everyone to all of those who joined us live on YouTube for the stream, and thanks to all of those who are listening and will get this episode once it's out on our podcast feed. And we hope to for future episodes. Do check out all the tonight. There's lots more, of course. We can't have everyone on, unfortunately, but Alex will have cut his work out for him and all the links this time around. So do check those out.
There will be links
on our website.
aplenty.
Exactly. That's all on our website, troubleterps.com. Social media as well. Quick tip, by the way, if you're on Twitter, there's a cool account which is called @lingpods, which is run by Lisa Dücker, and she sort of just retweets and shares a lot of podcasts that are on Twitter, so and find new shows to check out. Okay, that's it, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.